Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Raleigh. I'm the Managing Director of SynGAP Research Fund. We have a super cool website, if you don't know about it. Just before we jump in, I want to just do a quick advertisement from our sponsor, which is SRF, and point you to a couple things. Today, we released a really good blog by one of our directors talking about her child and inviting parents to do a survey about long-term planning. We have shared this on the Twitter, the LinkedIn, and the Facebook. So you can find it easily. You could also find it on our website in our blog. So please give this a quick read. It's not a long article, but it's a lovely article and a lovely reflection about a beautiful young SYNGAPian. And it also has a link to this survey on long-term planning. So the team is, a lot of parents are thinking about long-term planning, and if you aren't, you probably should be. So we want to gather people's thoughts and then do some peer education on that. That was the advertisement. So I'm going to hand it over now to Dr. Marta Dahia, who is a SynGAP parent and a director of the organization, and she will introduce our speaker today. Thank you all for being here. Most of this is being recorded. We will turn off the recording for a part of it, but just know that it's being recorded. And over to you, Marta. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, we are very excited to continue the SRF webinar series. The goal of the series is to get you closer to the science, making you aware of the research that is being done and the opportunities to participate and empower your communication with clinicians. We also want to invite you to our next webinar that it will take place September 17 at 9 a.m. Pacific time with Dr. Richard Huganir, titled Rescue of SynGAP Expression in SYNGAP1 Syndrome, ASOs, Small Molecules, and Viral Genetic Rescue. And of course, today our talk is titled Leveraging Technology to Improve Access to Rare Disease Research. It's by Elise Brimble. She's a certified genetic counselor specialized in neurogenetics. Elli has dedicated her career to children with rare disorders that affect the brain. Elli's interest in genetic counseling began when she pursued a graduate degree in molecular genetics, studying neuronal models of Williams syndrome. Elli decided to pursue a second graduate degree in genetic counseling at Boston University, where she then specialized in epilepsy and neurodevelopmental genetic disorders. She then went to Stanford Children's Hospital, where she was for 3 years. At Stanford, some of her most remarkable work was related to the creation of a natural history study for NGLY1 deficiency. She also worked closely with families diagnosed with FOXG1 and SYNGAP1, in both cases helping to support the creation of patient foundations and joining their scientific advisor board. Early this year, she started working at Ciitizen as a head of clinical operations. She's focused on accelerating knowledge in neurological diseases to facilitate clinical trials using machine learning. After this brief introduction, I want to let you know that a version will be recorded and it will be available on the SRF website. And by the end of the presentation, you will have opportunity to get your questions answered. Please use the chat to start formulating the questions. We love to see all those questions coming. And again, for the people that you just joined us, the title of the talk today is Leveraging Technology to Improve Access to Rare Disease Research, and it's by Elise Brimble. Elli, go ahead.
Thank you, Marta. That was a very generous introduction. Okay, let me get this set up. Everyone can hear me okay? Good. So as Marta mentioned, I'm going to talk with you today, also with Nasha Fitter, who's on the call as well, about some of the work we're doing at Ciitizen to increase access to rare disease research. So we're going to talk a little bit about what natural history studies are and why they're important. We'll introduce you to Ciitizen as well as our approach to data capture. And then we have a couple of slides just outlining the work that we have planned with SRF. All right, so to start talking about natural history studies, I actually wanted to introduce in overly simplistic terms what a clinical trial is. And so at its essence, a clinical trial consists of an intervention, whether that's a drug, a therapy, or some other approach. And then the other crucial component is a measure of effect. So we need to be able to identify whether or not that intervention actually did something meaningful. And so the number two, what we're actually looking for is a clinical endpoint. Clinical endpoints are outcomes that are measured in a clinical trial, and they can be something like an exam finding or a laboratory result. But ultimately, they represent a desired outcome, and they measure how a person feels, functions, or survives. And it's also critical that a clinical endpoint is something meaningful to the affected individual, or it can actually be a surrogate for something meaningful. So for example, if we know that a specific laboratory study or a blood test correlates with a symptom that is meaningful for the individual, we can actually use that blood test as the clinical endpoint. That said, it can actually be pretty hard to identify relevant endpoints in rare diseases. So number one, as I'm sure everyone on this call is intimately familiar with, rare diseases are incredibly variable. So they can differ across genotypes, across individuals of different ages. There are many factors that contribute to why one rare disease may look different in a number of different individuals. For rare disease, there's often limited understanding of the disease course or trajectory. And particularly in newly described conditions, there may be some bias in reporting where more severe cases are better understood than those that are on the milder end of the spectrum. There is often a limited understanding of the relevant biological pathways. And traditionally, there has been limited engagement with the patient community. So it almost feels like some of these decisions are being arrived upon without input from the individuals where this has the greatest impact. Fortunately, this is actually changing quite significantly, but in the past, I would say this was a more significant concern. And so this is really where the natural history study comes into play. So the official definition of a natural history study is that these are pre-planned observational studies that are intended to track the course of disease. Its purpose is to identify demographic, genetic, environmental, and other variables like treatment modalities or concomitant medications that correlate with the disease's development and outcome. Natural history studies are critical in rare disease because they provide us with a lot of useful information. So one, most importantly, is they can inform clinical endpoint selection. So what is that measure that is going to be meaningful to track in a clinical trial and can be successfully measured in a clinical trial? Sometimes those two things are not always the same. They can also help guide clinical trial planning and design. Clinical trials are expensive. You want to try and get it right the first time and not waste any time. In some cases, natural history studies can actually be used as an external control or a synthetic control arm in a clinical trial, meaning that you do not need to rely on a placebo arm. It can also help identify research priorities. So maybe a previously unrecognized symptom is uncovered in your natural history study, guiding research towards one specific area that might have been underappreciated in the past. And also importantly, a better understanding of a disease course can lead to the development of best practice guidelines. So something we hear commonly in the rare disease community is that even when you're being seen at large academic institutions, the clinicians that you're meeting with may have only previously come across a handful of individuals with that same condition. So as a community, natural history studies can power the development of guidelines that will help clinicians understand your rare condition, regardless of whether they have seen an individual with that particular condition in the past. And then lastly, natural history studies can also contribute to establishing centers of excellence. So are there academic centers in the country or in the world that have a particular expertise in managing that particular condition? And so ultimately, where I kind of envision natural history studies come into play and why I think it's important to start having these conversations early is that we really want a parallel process for clinical trial readiness. So not only is it critical that funding and efforts are being put into identifying a drug or therapy, but we also need clinical endpoint characterization to be happening in parallel so that these two processes are synced and you're arriving at clinical trial readiness at the same time. When these processes are out of sync, you're increasing the amount of time it takes to get to a successful therapy. That said, there are challenges in launching rare disease natural history studies. One is that costs are prohibitive, particularly when multiple sites need to be involved in order to accommodate the fact that rare diseases are rare. In some cases, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars per individual to participate in a natural history study. Enrollment and engagement can be challenging, particularly when we're talking about children who have multiple challenges associated with their condition. And this can contribute to significant burden for the family, particularly when we start thinking about taking time off work to travel for these participation or to participate at a natural history study. Notably, natural history studies tend to be pretty long. So these tend to last many years. There are multiple visits per year in some cases. And so it's not necessarily a quick process to land at your clinical endpoint characterization. And then the last 2 points I think are specifically important for the rare disease community. Traditionally, it's been pretty hard to access data that is collected as part of a traditional natural history study. And it also can be hard to share that data that has been collected. When we think about natural history study design from a rare disease foundation perspective, it's most helpful to get this information in as many hands as possible to help facilitate arriving at clinical endpoint characterization more quickly, but sometimes that's not possible when you're working with one or more academic institutions. And so this is where we think Ciitizen can be useful to the rare disease community. So at its core, Ciitizen is a patient-mediated SaaS platform that allows users to collect and store their medical records. Ciitizen then turns these medical record documents into computable, digital, and relevant data sets that can then be shared at the user's direction. So to break this out, we see a very cute little girl here at the top left-hand corner. The caregiver would make a request to the institution on behalf of that individual. We then leverage the HIPAA right of access to collect all of that patient's medical records. And then you'll see here, we really collect everything. We get the clinic notes, we get procedure notes, we get genetic test results, and we also collect DICOM imaging files as well, which can be useful if there is an imaging finding that's relevant for your disease. We then use machine learning and natural language processing assisted extraction to identify defined data elements. We have a human review component for quality assurance and quality control. And then as a result, we take these unstructured medical record documents and turn them into a file format that's structured, it's coded, you can query it, and you can port it. Most importantly, all of this happens with the individual's consent. So none of this process would occur without the express consent and approval of the individual on whose behalf we're collecting these medical records. Just briefly, I wanted to introduce the team that has been working in our rare disease space. So on the top left-hand corner, you'll see our CEO and founder. He's Anil Sethi, and has really been in the healthcare technology space for a few decades now. So he is intimately aware with what are the best and fastest strategies to access an individual's medical record. In the middle is Devin McGraw. She actually comes to us from the Office of Civil Rights under the Obama administration and wrote many of the HIPAA guidelines. And so her involvement has really been critical in our ability to quickly access medical records. Nasha will probably go into this in more detail, but one of our favorite stories to tell is that in the past, Stanford was like one of our least compliant institutions. And with Devon's help, we actually get records from Stanford within 1 to 2 hours now. So this is really fast. On the right, we have Alexa Burke, who is our head of real world evidence and research. And she has been in this space for a couple decades now. And so has really been instrumental in guiding how we design these studies to be most useful when we're thinking about having a very specific target, which is clinical trial readiness. Nasha is going to talk to you in a little bit. She is our head of rare disease at Ciitizen, and also the mother of a child with a rare disorder. And then I also like to show Brian's image. He's our director of clinical informatics. And I don't really know what his like real title is, but I kind of call him our terminology wizard because he has devoted his entire career to normalizing complex data sets, particularly in the healthcare space. And so it's really with his guidance and help that we've been able to launch this process. And then, just for transparency, I always like to show this slide, because I think it's important for you guys to know exactly who we are and what we do. So we have a few different people who use our platform. First and foremost is always the patient. So when a user signs up to our platform, they are given access to their medical records all in one place, which I'm sure many of us know is not always that easy. And then they also get access to a summarized medical history, and all of this is done free of charge. Notably, they can then share that profile and those medical records with anyone whom they would like to, whether that's another caregiver, a provider to facilitate a second opinion, or to donate it for research purposes. We also partner with academic institutions. So when an individual has consented to share their data, we will license those de-identified data sets to academic research initiatives free of charge. Again, we really don't want to be a roadblock in facilitating important research. As you know, we also partner with advocacy groups in order to generate population level data and also to support registries. And then lastly, we do partner with biopharma. So with consent, we will license data sets to industry sponsors, and this is ultimately how we're generating revenue to be able to do the work that we do. And so with that, I am going to turn things over to Nasha, who is going to give you a demo of our platform.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Let me share my screen and then we can go into that slide. So nice to be here and talk to everyone. Love SynGAP. My child didn't have FOXG1 syndrome. I hope she'd have SynGAP so I could be part of your community. Before I go into the demo, I want to show you something and then just tell you a little bit about Ciitizen as well. As Ellie mentioned, we're able to get medical records really quickly, and it's really largely thanks to Devon. So this is an initiative we did when I first joined Ciitizen. Actually, my task was to build our operations to collect medical records with Devon. And what we realized really quickly is that no one was getting their medical records. And we were pretty shocked about this. So we did a lot of different strategies, but the one that really worked is our patient record scorecard. And you can look, it's just ciitizen.com scorecard. You can look it up, it's gotten a ton of press. And what we did is we started scoring providers on how they comply with the HIPAA right of access. So every patient in the United States has the right to their own medical records. You have the right to get it in the way you want, and you have the right to get it within 30 days and your entire record. So if you tell Stanford, I want you to email me my records, they are supposed to do that. That, of course, is not what we found was happening. So we created the scorecard, and this real public shaming, but also public reward for providers that were doing a great job is what has moved the needle. And as Ellie mentioned, Stanford's just one of thousands of institutions that we've been able to move the needle on. So this is the first step, is we have to actually get the records to do this great analysis. And so that's how we do that. And then let me get into the Ciitizen app. And an interesting thing about Anil, Ellie mentioned he's been in the space for a few decades. his last company was called Glimpse, which I don't know if any of you remember, but it looked at data within your patient portal and then gave it back to you in a way that you could consume. That company was acquired by Apple and became the Apple Health platform. So if any of you use, Apple Health for yourselves, that was all started and generated by Anil. And Ciitizen really is an kind of a more depth way of looking at Glimpse. So during this acquisition from Apple, Anil's little sister Tanya was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And in the 5 months he spent trying to save her life, taking her to 17 different institutions, is where he got a front row seat of how broken the medical system is in terms of getting your records, making sense out of them, connecting the data to pharma companies, figuring out what trials that she should be in. He realized that most researchers in the world, even for something like breast cancer, which is so prevalent, don't have access to all data. And that was the genesis of Ciitizen. And so I'm going to go into his actual little sister Tanya's account. We use this for demo purposes and just show you kind of the platform. The platform's going to go through many changes over the next few months, just to give you guys an FYI, many improvements we're going to be putting out into the system. And many of these improvements are really focused on the rare disease community, which we're excited about. So in Tanya's account, as Elli mentioned, and I've mentioned, we go and collect all the medical records, and you could see that we really mean it. This is Tanya's records from Hopkins. It's the full 2,274 pages. We get doctor's notes, things that are handwritten, photocopies, we get absolutely everything. And so for you as a patient or parent of a patient, your first value is that all of the records are digitized in one place. And you own these records. Ciitizen doesn't own them. You can download them on your hard drives, take them, you could share them with whoever you want to share them with. And this is awesome when we look at images, because we are also going to collect your MRI imaging studies. And here, I've done this for Amara, where I have CDs from Stanford and then I'm like mailing them to different places. You don't have to do that anymore. You can just share this again, and it's the raw file that you can share. So if you're sharing it from Stanford to NYU, they will actually get the raw files necessary to download on their systems and look at the images. So this is the first immediate value. The second is going to be the summary. And again, I'm showing you a cancer summary, right? For SynGAP, it's going to be this, the neuro summary, not the cancer summary, but this will give you a really good idea. So in Tanya's case, she had breast cancer. And again, we don't ask the patient to tell us any of this information. We are gathering it from the record. So in this case, you'll notice, and let me make my screen bigger. These are the two documents that we figured out that she has breast cancer. Diagnostic imaging report, and we've got her pathology report. For our disorders, the genetic testing report is going to be the gold standard. Let's say we don't get the genetic testing report and we just have your clinician notes that states your diagnosis. Next to where it says primary diagnosis, it will say unconfirmed, and we will go back to the hospital and ask for that genetic testing report. And if we have to contact your lab, we will do that. So this is really important, how we verify that we have the right report that is linking to all of these elements. So if I look into these two reports, diagnostic imaging and pathology report, there's a couple things to notice. Number one, there's a paragraph, right? Ultrasound demonstrates an irregular elongated solid mass under the diagnostic imaging report. If I go to the path report, you've got invasive ductal carcinoma in situ, et cetera, et cetera. So the interesting things here are that they're both paragraphs. In these paragraphs, it doesn't say breast cancer, and they're both different. Yet our machines are able to understand between the relationships in words that both of these paragraphs mean breast cancer, and more importantly, that they both link up to this SNOMED code. Elli talked earlier about Brian, who is our terminology wizard. SNOMED is a really important way to characterize disease. It is used across the world, so it allows us to normalize medical records across the world. We also use other codes like RX norm codes you might be familiar with for medications, LOINC codes for measurements, but we try to get everything to connect back up to the SNOMED codes. And Elli will elaborate more into all the things that we can do once we have these codes. So this is just an example of how we go into your medical record and then how we extract the value. And that is going to be the case for every single thing. You can notice these are all the elements we've chosen that are important for breast cancer. And for all of them, we do this process. And the last thing is you'll notice that there is a report. So anytime you want to do an FDA submission, you have to show full data provenance. Provenance basically means that you can prove that, yes, this element comes from this document, and we're able to do that. The last thing I'll say is, we are going to be launching on the platform in a couple months the ability also for surveys. So we'll be able to marry this clinical data with patient-reported data to make a truly comprehensive natural history study. Elli, I'm going to give it back to you now.
Elli, I think you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. Apologies. Okay. Now that we have a nice sense of what the platform looks like and what we're envisioning for SynGAP, I wanted to dive a little bit more into our approach to data capture. It might not be the most exciting topic, but I think it's really important to demonstrate the thought that we're taking to ensure that the data we're collecting is actually going to be useful at the end of the day. All right, so when we think about data capture, we really have sort of two levels. The first, or the topmost level, is our disease model. And essentially that is our conceptual foundation, defining what is important to extract and what are the relationships between those elements. So it's not particularly useful to extract something that is one-dimensional and linear. What we really want to do is create a web or a network of data, and our disease model is what allows us to do that. If we go a layer underneath, we now have our ontology, which is essentially our manually curated standardized terminologies. And this is going to be critical for harmonization and normalization of data. So we really want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. There are many circumstances where something might be described by one clinician in one way and differently by another clinician. And so we really want to make sure that we understand those two things are actually the same. And then ultimately, this is going to support data portability. As Nasha mentioned, we're using internationally recognized terminologies. And so these will be understood and meaningful to people outside of Ciitizen. These are actually all used by laboratories, by our electronic health record systems. So the goal is really that anything we're generating through this data extraction approach can be portable to any system that you might need it to go to one day. This is an outline of our disease model and the specific data elements that we've determined to be important. So just starting at the top left, as Nasha mentioned, our primary diagnosis and our genetic test report in many cases are going to be one and the same for the most part. It's really talking about what is the unifying genetic diagnosis that explains an individual's features. Clinical diagnosis we're using to reference really any clinical symptom that is associated with that diagnosis, whether it's developmental delay, hearing loss, dysphagia. Those are all features that we're going to be extracting. For conditions where seizure history is important, we have the ability to more granularly capture seizure types, as well as the frequency of those individual seizure types. We track growth parameters over time. Nutritional status and weight have been a commonly used endpoint for clinical trials in rare disease, so we absolutely want to be sure that we're capturing that. It's not uncommon in genetic neurodevelopmental disorders for there to be abnormal puberty, and so we're also capturing the age at when females first have their period. That actually is often variable in individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders, so we think it's critical for us to capture. Any diagnostic procedure, so things like a biopsy, a brain MRI, an EEG, nerve conduction studies, those would all be captured here. Therapeutic procedures are going to include anything like a surgery, any treatment that an individual has that's more of a therapy rather than a medication. For development, we're tracking milestones, when those milestones were achieved, and whether any assistive devices are used. If the child has had any standardized assessments, like as part of a developmental and behavioral pediatrics visit, we are capturing that as well. We capture exam findings over time, medication use, any adverse effects associated with a medication, hospital admissions, any lab results that might be relevant to your condition, as well as end of life. So that was a very long way of saying that we really are capturing a breadth of information, and we specifically tailored this disease model to those entities and elements that we think are going to be most helpful for allowing us to achieve clinical trial readiness. And then here's just an example of how granular our standardized terminologies get, which really support detailed data extraction. So as Nasha mentioned, we really have 3 terminologies that we manually curate to develop our ontology. The first is SNOMED, which looks at clinical phenotypes, RxNorm we use for medications, and LOINC for measurements. And so you can see in each of these boxes, there are some examples of terms that have a specific code assigned to them. And one thing that's important to recognize is that the relationships between these codes are maintained. So if we look in the clinical phenotypes box, you'll see there is a term for ataxia, ataxic arms, ataxic legs, and cerebellar ataxia. All of these things are referencing ataxia. And if we were to actually dive a little bit deeper, what we would find is that ataxic arms, ataxic legs, and cerebellar ataxia are all actually mapping back up to this more general ataxia term. So that relationship is maintained, which is going to be really critical again for normalization. All right, and then I do just like to point out that, again, probably not surprising to anyone, but SNOMED was not designed to cater towards rare disease. And so one of the other great benefits of having Brian on our team is that he's part of the international SNOMED working groups. And so we continue to create new concepts to capture terms that we think are meaningful for this community. And then with Brian's help, we're actually able to submit those so that those become the official terms that are used worldwide. So in that manner, we're kind of contributing to increased ability to capture symptoms and features and medications that are relevant to the rare disease community in a way that's normalized and useful for the international community, essentially. And then I just wanted to kind of show you an example of what this would actually look like about how we apply the ontology. So this is a sort of a typical neurology exam note. It's completely unstructured. You know, if we were to kind of try to use this in its current format to support a clinical trial, it wouldn't be particularly helpful. And so what we do is we go through this document and we apply structure to it. So for example, for cranial nerves, we have a code for pupils equal, round, and reactive to light. We also have a code for generalized hypotonia, as well as for hyperkinesis, sensation grossly intact, and ataxic gait. So we've basically taken this unstructured mass of data, and we're now applying uniformity to it in a way that we can come back and ask questions of the data and track this data over time. And then ultimately what our output is we end up with this streamlined and normalized medical history. So for example, this is Nasha's daughter. She was really first diagnosed at 7 months of age with with infantile spasms. We can see that she's had various procedures, started a medication, had a genetic diagnosis, had a physical exam. But what I really want to drive home is that all of these are completely normalized and coded. So we're talking about these elements the same way for every patient, again, applying that critical normalization that currently does not exist in our medical records as is. And then I kind of geek out about this. It might not be as exciting for other people, but this is the SNOMED code for SynGAP. So we're ready to go to start categorizing clinical phenotypes associated with SynGAP. All right, so moving on to talk about what we've scoped with SynGAP Research Fund. To start, we are going to have 100 people with SYNGAP1 related disorder. We will collect your medical records, perform our systematic data extraction, and then as you saw, all of those data elements will be normalized and fit to our model. And then as Nasha also mentioned, we're working to be able to pair this objective clinical data with the incredibly valuable and meaningful data that comes from the patient community itself, whether that's surveys. We have a selection of validated survey measures to evaluate phenotypes or symptoms that are going to be important for the community, things like sleep, seizure frequency, anxiety, etc. Diaries, validated measures, as I mentioned. And then we're also starting to talk a little bit about wearables and whether or not we would be able to absorb some of that data as well once those technologies are better validated.
Yeah, and Ellie, I'll just say one thing that this year we are starting with 50 SynGAP patients, and we'll bring on the next 50 in 2021.
Perfect. Okay, and then that was kind of a whirlwind, but all of this is really to say that at the same time SRF is funding critical research for drug discovery, we are going to parallel process so that the clinical endpoint characterization is being addressed at the same time. So we're arriving at clinical trial readiness in parallel and in synchronization. All right, thank you guys, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ellie and Nasha. So everybody, please, we have 40 people on this call, so please put your questions in the chat. I want to say three things. Thing number one, thank you, Ellie and Nasha. I want to emphasize, Ellie was a genetic counselor at Stanford, and my son wouldn't be diagnosed without her. As those of you who've had the pleasure of working with me know, I'm stubborn and opinionated and generally difficult, and I was worse before my kid got sick. And if it wasn't for Ellie's persistence and kindness and wisdom, I wouldn't be here. So A, it's personal, but B, she knows what a SynGAPian looks like because she's seen them in the clinic. So the fact that she's left the clinic and is now at this company looking at data about hopefully all of our children is just thrilling for me, and speaks to the wisdom of Nasha for recruiting her. So Nasha is sort of my analog, although she's better at everything, in the FOXG1 space. And she's a rare mom. She's got a young child who has a very similar disease, and she takes care of her kid when she's home, and she works for rare disease patients at Ciitizen by day. So these are two wonderful human beings that we're blessed to be working with. That was point number one. Point number two, we are first in line, but we are not guinea pigs. So this is doubly exciting, right? Ciitizen is going into rare, and there's 4 or 5 rare groups starting on September 1st. We are very lucky to be one of them. So we are in the first cohort of rare groups, but Ciitizen didn't just wake up last week, hire Ellie and do rare. Ciitizen, ever since, as Nasha alluded, ever since Anil's sister, Tanya, had that breast cancer and died of it, Ciitizen's been in the space for 2 years doing this work for breast cancer. So the art and science of medical letter correction, the normalization, the software, the dashboards, the patient engagement, go to their website, look closely at all the people they're working with. This is a world-class company led by a successful technologist who's passionate about medical records, and they've made the mistakes already, if they made any, and they've learned the lessons, and now we have the benefit of all that expertise for our kids. So I think that's an important point I'd like to drive home. Don't worry, I'll get to questions in a second. Point number 3, I have slides because I always have slides.
I'll stop sharing.
It's okay. I wanted to share this press release from the FDA that they were really excited about. They awarded 2 grants for a natural history study in rare disease. This is dated 2019. They awarded $4 million for 2 studies over 4 years. So our options as a community are, hope to God we get in that queue that gets that money to wait 4 years so we can fly around and poke and prod our kids with a bunch of tests they've already had. Or we can do this. first, good luck winning that lottery. Second, I don't want to wait 4 years. And as Elli wisely started, you can't run a clinical trial without knowing what you're measuring. And that's what we're going to figure out with this data. There's a presentation from the FDA where I got this next slide. This is just sort of a visual of a clinical trial. I want to point out that natural history study is foundational right here. We can make these trials happen faster by standing up this natural history study now and organizing our data now. That's why SRF has invested so much in this effort. As we know, small molecules are coming up. If you've been paying attention to the webinar series, you know Dr. Kadam is working on FICOMPA. We know Dr. Rumba has grants to do a high throughput screening. We also know that there's a lot of small ASOs that are in the works. If you don't know what those are, call me. But there's a lot of therapies that are coming. There will be therapies for children and adults with SynGAP in 3 to 5 years. But when those therapies leave the lab, it's not a given that they will go into humans. Between a therapy leaving a lab and my son getting a drug that makes him better, or your child or your sister or your loved one getting a drug that makes them better, there's a clinical trial that proves it's worth it, right? That clinical trial needs to be informed by data, and we cannot assume that they'll just hop on it. If the data is not there, they're going to take 1 or 2 years to collect it, figure it out, and do it. That's 1 or 2 years that our loved ones won't be treated. That's why we're doing this now. So finding consentable patients, getting medical history on patients, confirming the medical history, the provenance, pushing out questionnaires, getting all of this stuff is going to happen in advance through Ciitizen. And so this effort that we're talking about is really 3 groups working together. SRF, which is patient-led, patient-funded, all patient families. Ciitizen, which you've learned about today, and you guys as families sharing your data. I want to emphasize the point they made. Nasha, Devin basically wrote the US government guidelines on HIPAA. She's using HIPAA to help us. They always undersell. The sign-on process for this is going to be 15 minutes-ish. Then Ciitizen's going to do all the work, all the medical records collection. It's amazing. And that's because of this leadership. And then again, Anil knows what he's doing. If any family on this call has questions or concerns or whatever, this link gets you on my calendar. Please reach out. We are doing this for the patients. This is an important effort, and I'm so excited to be partnering with Ciitizen and Elli and Nasha on this. And with that, I'm going to jump into the million questions that have shown up.
Yeah, Mike, I tried to answer some of them the early ones, but there's a lot more that have come in.
Oh, I want to actually, if you don't mind, JJ, can I put you on stage for 1 minute and just ask you to briefly sum up, and I'll cue you up. So as we've been working on this partnership with Ciitizen, I've been talking to them, and in parallel, JJ's son was diagnosed, and we were trying to get her into a Stanford, which is because we both live close to Stanford, and Stanford needed her medical records, but where she was, a lot of people were giving her the runaround on medical records. And I mentioned this to Ciitizen, and the good people at Ciitizen were like, this is crazy, we can help with that, put us in touch. And then I just want JJ to tell you what happened next, so you can see that this is already helping. Is that cool, JJ? Sorry, I didn't warn you I was gonna do this.
You're gonna hear Stephen in the background. So Nasha talked to me, and I told her just a little bit of our story. And then she started the process of walking me through how to sign up with Ciitizen, because she graciously offered to just help me collect my medical records. I've been fighting for months to get them. And at the time I had started collecting them. I didn't know who I wanted to get referred to, but I knew I needed to go above where we were at, because we live in a relatively small town, and Sacramento is our nearest big hospital, but even we were exhausting our resources. So I knew I had to go probably to the Bay Area. And I know I needed to share Stephen's story, and playing telephone and me being the communicator to physicians wasn't enough. So I had tried to collect Stephen's records. And because we live in a smallish town, I think I have like 13 to 17 different institutions that I was trying to collect his records from. and they wouldn't give them to me. Some people would, and they would charge me like $25 every time they printed a page. Some of them wouldn't do anything digital. I couldn't get my hands on any of his imaging. And in some places, like where he had his CT, they even refused to acknowledge him as a patient. And I started signing up with Ciitizen, and it took me 30 seconds to get past the login page. And then Nasha was helping me because my institutions and my physicians are so small, some of them, that they weren't even in the drop-down menu. But that didn't matter. All I had to do was put their name and their phone number. And if I had their address, I would put that in, and I can self-type it in. And then basically I spent another 15-ish minutes just typing in each individual place that I wanted his records accessed, so that I could think of off the top of my head in that amount of time. And if I had a question and Nasha wasn't there, I used the little like ask menu, or the ask thing that came up, and they immediately answered and were very helpful. And then I waited about a week. And in that week, I had probably 4 or 5 phone calls that I actually answered from different medical offices, asking me to sign HIPAA releases, or telling me that the HIPAA release that I had already signed through Ciitizen, which took me 2 seconds to do, wasn't valid. And eventually I stopped answering these calls, and I just said, Ciitizen can handle it. I've been talking to you for months. I've signed your paperwork repeatedly. I have signed their release, which was written by HIPAA lawyers. Talk to them. And I didn't do anything else. And a week later, I had thousands of pages of Stephen's medical records. I had his MRI, I had his fluoroscopy, I had his CT. I had his genetic report that I couldn't get my whole hands on. And I had everything. And then if there wasn't something, like if I thought of something later, or I thought something was missing, I reached out to them, and they even checked in with me throughout the week to make sure that things were coming along, and they got it. And then I had one place who I had fought with for months to get his CT call and tell me, I'm sorry, it should not have been that hard. They actually apologized to me. And then I didn't have to pay for anything. I had stopped paying because I had already spent hundreds of dollars trying to collect things. And I had this huge folder of random pieces of paper that I can't make fit because nobody would give me everything. But Ciitizen got it, and it's all there. It's all just like, I don't think we have a dashboard yet, but I just have like a screen with all of the PDFs, all of his images or imaging studies, and it's there. And if I want to update it, I just go click on it and I say, we've been there since you've collected this, and I say update. And if I wanted to do that, Ciitizen would then just update it for me. I don't have to do anything. And then like a couple weeks later, I got my referral to Stanford, and then we got our visit.
Awesome.
They streamlined something I spent months working on in the matter of a couple weeks. And
Thank you so much, JJ.
Like you say, it takes 15 minutes to sign up. It takes 30 seconds to sign up. It takes 15 minutes for me to hand type everything. But for people that have only been to a few places, or they've been to big hospitals, it's going to just be a drop down click. So easy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, JJ. I want to make sure we save time for questions. And, we always make an effort to appear to try to keep to the hour. We always spill over, but, it's good to keep up appearances. Let me throw. So I think JJ's story, which was totally organic, by the way, just happened because of the generosity of Nasha and people at Ciitizen. But it's a great story because it captures a couple things. First of all, Ciitizen does the work. Second of all, the consent you sign with them once, one and done. Third of all, by law, no one should be charging you anything. So, the people at Ciitizen are smart, and we're taking advantage of their smarts. I'm going to let you, Nasha and Elli, I'm going to let you take these questions. Can we talk a little bit about the updating process? We have a question from Rebecca about, do you get an alert when the records hit your record? And then maybe you can talk about the updating. And then related question from Olga, what about newborn records? How do they get in there? And then what happens if you guys do the pull and looks like something's missing? Like, is is this transactional, or do we get to keep talking? How does this all work?
Yeah, so these are all great questions. So one is when your records come in, you will get an automatic alert from the system saying your records are in. So if you notice something is missing, you should absolutely let us know right away, because then we can go back to the institution. Otherwise, when we do the abstraction work, and as Elli mentioned, there is a human element checking everything, we will notice that there's data missing, and then we will go back to that medical institution as well. So either way, we're going to make sure we have your full information. Elli, do you want to answer the question around newborn screening?
Yeah, so essentially we collect records from every institution that you enter. So that could actually be a good point if your child was born at a different hospital than the one where they receive care routinely, to remember to enter that institution in. And then the reality is that the way that we don't have something specific to newborn data, but we capture things that are sort of important in thinking about the course of a particular condition. So we capture weight, height, and head circumference at birth. If there were any sort of challenges associated with the birth, or if the baby had an abnormal newborn exam, those are all things that would be captured. So even though there's not a specific newborn category, we're still collecting information related to the events surrounding the birth.
Mike, if I could answer one question from Janie, that this is an amazing amount of work, how does it get funded? That is a really good question. So the reason SynGAP is even involved in this is because of Mike's massive persistence. We had about 40 groups wanting to get in, and we can't take on everyone at once. We're scaling our platform slowly, and we'll be able to take on many more groups next year, but right now we just couldn't. But Mike made sure, SynGAP is coming in before FOXG1, just to give you an idea of how persistent Mike is. So you guys are very lucky to have him, and SRF is funding this. So you as a patient don't have to pay absolutely anything. SRF pays for it, and then as biotech companies want to license your data, they will license it, and then we actually do a revenue sharing back to SRF. So we hope that will help you drive your other programs.
And I've had enough conversations with enough families that I can hear the questions in people's heads that are happening right now. So I just want to talk to that for a second. SRF is paying a fee to Ciitizen for this. Ciitizen spent, by no means are we covering Citizen's costs, right?
Yeah, it's about an eighth of what our costs are even.
Right. Still not a trivial sum, but not their full cost. As time goes on, the biotechs, the big pharma, the people who are doing exactly what we want, working on drugs for our kids, have a choice. They can spend millions doing their own natural history study, or they can license this data from Ciitizen for much less. So they're winning. So that money goes to Ciitizen, as it should. Ciitizen, Nasha mentioned, shares 10% of net revenues to SRF. So wait, what's happening there? Is someone making money? Absolutely not. As anyone who knows SRF knows well, 100% of every penny that comes into SRF goes into a lab. 100%. Because every penny of overheads are paid for by our founders, who is my wife. But that's a separate issue, right? So any money that comes back to SRF goes directly to scientific research. So the money's really important, and I'm so glad you asked, Janie. And at the end of the day, as you all know, we're funding postdocs and lab research in 5 different labs in the US right now. And that's super important. But we don't know which lab's gonna win. And we're talking to, I can't even keep track of all the companies and labs I'm talking to right now. But all these people are developing therapies, and we don't know which one of them is gonna win, which one of them is gonna actually make a therapy. But we do know that absolutely every single one of them who's gonna do something that is gonna help our kids is gonna need the highest quality data. And my son has been through enough EEGs, enough spinal taps, enough exams, enough stupid tests where the answer after page 2 is no to everything. The thought of paying money to fly him around to re-subject him to that sounds like insanity if it's already sitting in his medical records. And that's where I think, Nasha and Elli kept saying normalization, normalization, normalization. It was like, what are you talking about? It's this idea that you can't, if I take 5 families here and I throw their medical records down, some research will be like, this is apples and oranges. I can't make head or tail of this. But because of the incredible software that Ciitizen's built, the robots go through and use these SNOMED codes to make it all so that they can. And let's talk about who sees what data, because that's the question I've gotten repeatedly. Because part of the thing that makes this so cool is I can see the PDF, right? I can see my son and be like, when did we start keto? I type keto into my Ciitizen search bar and I find the exact piece of paper when he was admitted to Stanford. And that's when Elli got him diagnosed, by the way. But do the researchers see that? No. So we see the PDF, the robots see the PDF, right? And then the robot makes, if you can imagine, the biggest Excel spreadsheet you've ever seen. You know, adult, male, date of birth, diagnoses, other diagnoses, drugs, height, weight, blah, 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 blah. And that big old CSV file goes to researchers so they can do research. This is Stephen, by the way, with JJ stealing my thunder. And then if a drug company comes in, they get the same anonymized data. So your personally identified information is hidden. Now, if a drug company were to say, hey, this 18-month-old boy, he's really interesting because of this thing. We really need to understand this better, or we really think that there's a way we can help him, or we really, whatever they need to think. They would go to Ciitizen and say, hey, we want to talk to patient 52. And Ciitizen would call me up and be like, they want to talk to patient 52. And I'd be like, okay, patient 52, that's Stephen, who's sitting there on the screen with JJ. And I'd call JJ up, or we'd email her, there'd be some process. And we'd say, JJ, would you be willing to talk to drug company X about your kid to help all our kids? I can tell you right now, JJ is going to say yes. But this company is called Ciitizen. It's not called corporation, right? It was built by a man who just saw his sister die and wasted a lot of her last months on earth struggling with health records. So it's the patient is protected, and our rights and our data are thought about. And a former Obama HIPAA lawyer is their privacy officer, right? So I encourage you to go to their website and read everything. Go to ciitizen.com, Ciitizen spelled with 2 I's, /privacy policy. Read the letter from Devin. There's you'll never get through it all, but it's all there. And our data is protected, and there's no way without your explicit consent, your anonymized data would be traced back to you. Sorry, that was a long one. Other questions? What have I missed? Neil, looks like you're going to say something.
I just wondered about European records and US records. Is it US only or both?
Yeah, no, great question. Right now it is US only, but 2021, either the end of Q1 or the beginning of Q2, we'll be able to start bringing on European records. Now in Europe, we're not going to be able to go and collect medical records on behalf of families. You'll have to collect your own records and then upload them.
Okay.
We will help you with that though, create guides for you, things like that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nasha, you didn't mention about updates, but updates can happen 2 ways. You can say, hey, I just went to Stanford and spent 3 days getting all these tests. Please requery Stanford. And their robots would go or their people would go and ping Stanford, and 2 hours later, you'd have everything. The other thing that would happen is every 6 months, that's then you would know and be like, hey, it's been 6 months. Have you been anywhere? Here's a list of your places. Should we do an update? And you could go click, click, click and say yes or no. I think what's cool about this is as the dashboard rolls out, and Tony is 6. I have like 5,000 pages. I'm not reading 5,000 pages. But as their dashboard gets built out, you're going to log in to your Ciitizen platform, because each of you get a Ciitizen account. You log in, you're going to see all this beautiful organization of your data, and you're going to be able to query it and interact like you've never done before. So it'll be painless to be like, oh yeah, update this, and you'll be good. Yeah. Other questions?
And that's why we space it out, to Jessica's question, because we don't want to keep sending, every month. We don't want to keep bothering your institutions. They'll get annoyed and not want to work with us. So we want to make sure you've actually seen them and then go and ask for your records.
Can we talk about,
there's a lot of questions around behavioral studies and newborn studies, things like that. Elli, do you want to go into that?
Yes, so we are not currently
Elli,
did Elli freeze?
Elli froze for me. Luckily, it's not an embarrassing freeze. It's very still.
I can answer one of those. We're not collecting records from early intervention right now, or your children's school, etc. None of that falls under HIPAA. We can think about, of course, all those records are going to be really critical. So we'll think about in the future, how we can incorporate them. Some of those are going to be incorporated in the surveys that we send out to you. So you'll be able to actually add a lot of information within that. But as of right now, we're not going after those agencies to get those records. Her computer just completely crashed. She probably had like an IBM. Okay, let's see. Psychological services will be collected. That is part of the medical record. You do have to signify that. That will be a question as per state law that is asked if you want us to collect your children's psychological records. So you will have to remember to click yes to that. ABA as well does not fall under HIPAA, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, the behavioral issues, because autism is a SNOMED code, there are a lot of codes under autism. So the self-injury, aggression, all of that is going to be really critical. I can give you more information on that because I know for SynGAP, this is a clear phenotype of importance. So we'll dive more into that and make sure that we are collecting all the information around behavioral issues. And I know that's also a really good clinical endpoint, even in mouse models, et cetera, behavioral tests. So we'll make sure we do that really well.
I want to also preempt another question that comes up a lot. Do our researchers know about this? Yes, we have, Nasha and Elli have done a webinar with our researchers. We have told our researchers about it. And there's at least 2 researchers I'm talking to who are already like, wait, we could do this because of Ciitizen. How would we use Ciitizen to answer that question? Because you got to think about our researchers are people too, right? They have families and they need to sleep, all these unfortunate realities. So every minute they waste gathering data, going to IRBs, figuring out how to get 20 patients MRIs, is time they're not thinking about science for our children. And so by building this solution, we as parents can actually do something really helpful and useful to support their work. And they're aware. I mean, it's on September 1st. Yeah, let me share my screen. I want to show you one thing. On September 1st, we're going live and enrolling the first 50. So remember, mic time, but if you go to the website, I want to just point out, there's a lot of information you can read right now. So here's the breast cancer thing, right? Breast cancer, you click on that, full data provenance, super cool. And if you or anyone in your family has cancer, God forbid, they should be using Ciitizen because it's free and available right now. But if you scroll up here, you get the blow by blow on, how it works, who they've worked with. These are all good names. Nasha, where's my logo? And then,
It's there.
Is it?
Is there another one for rare? Oh, your logo's not up yet because we haven't started your onboarding.
Okay, fine. And then the FAQ is amazing. I mean, these things go forever, right? So if you have questions, I strongly encourage you to go to what is publicly stated on their website. Privacy is a very real issue. This is Devin. This thing goes on forever. Please read it. And then September 1st, this is my favorite page. There's 2 of my favorite logos and a real life SynGAPian. And on September 1st, you will click this button and you could enroll. Yeah. And all covered by SRF. So
yeah, and Mike, there's a question on, is Ciitizen pushing updates to likely interested companies? So yes, absolutely. Citizen's not going to just sit back and wait and hope the data gets used. We will go and start talking to companies. We'll talk to companies that aren't even looking at SynGAP right now and let them know we have this data set. Are you interested? That's a huge part of what our team does and what Alexa does. We'll also publish on your data. We will, we have the data, we'll do different analyses. We work with the IRB. And so we're going to help push your data forward. In fact, there's so many examples I have of other groups who have gotten researchers excited about their data because the work Ciitizen did afterwards. This goes into, there was another question on when do we de-identify the data? So the view you saw is your view. So that's why it was all identified. On the back end, what we give scientists is aggregated. It's like a CSV file. That's how they want it. And it's completely de-identified. So it gets de-identified in the process of abstraction.
I think does anyone else have a burning question? Because I think we're kind of at the hour, and I'm so grateful everyone's here. I'm so grateful. I just can't emphasize enough, guys. Nasha and Elli have moved mountains on this, and we are very lucky to have them in our corner. So if there's no one's got oh my God, I have to have an answer now, you can always email me, mike@syngapresearchfund.org. You can always get on my calendar. But Elli, ELLI @citizen.com, 2 I's, Nasha @citizen.com. Just send them a note and say thank you, if nothing else, because they really, I can't tell you how hard they work and how many stupid questions I have hit them with day and night.
Yes, so many questions. So many.
Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, bye. I'm so excited to work with all of you. Bye.
You will.
Thank you.